All right, looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody flying on the rainbow, underneath the rainbow in between? Welcome to yet another installment of Chaos Under Heaven, a podcast where we talk about current events, politics, economics, history, theory, and philosophy from a Marxist perspective. And boy, do we have some current events and happenings to review with you guys today. Today, I'm going to be talking about how a council of unelected, unaccountable, out-of-touch, decrepit vampires are arbitrarily deciding to roll the clocks back on women's rights, the implications of said rollbacks, fascist terror in New York, as well as Finland to join NATO, runaway inflation, the doomsday clock, and whatever other topics bounce around and we decide to get around to talking about today. But first things first, shout out to my Patreons. Your gratuity is greatly appreciated. Every penny and cent helps. And I promise you guys, scripted content is coming very soon. I've been very, very preoccupied with my mixed martial arts training. In fact, before I came and I did this, I did about an hour of live sparring, little mixed martial arts, little bam, 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 little boom, boom action. And now I'm joined by you guys. And I'm not by myself. I'm joined by a good comrade and friend of mine, Lucy Grimm. So Lucy is, of course, a comrade and had firsthand experience as an activist on the ground. So Lucy, tell us about yourself. What kind of work have you been involved in?
Hi, I am Lucy Grimm. Nice to meet y'all. The work I have been currently doing is a lot of protests and organized primarily by Abortion Defense Pittsburgh in cooperation with Pittsburgh DSA and tons of other grassroots organizations such as Sisters, which they are fighting for not just women's rights in this, but this whole Roe v. Wade thing affects transgender and non-binary people as well. Tons of stuff going on. Tons of fundraising.
How do you feel it has infected non-binary and LGBT folk? Just curious.
Because women are not the only people with a uterus. Transgender men have those as well, and you have non-binary people with the uterus as well. So they can also get pregnant and need this care as well. So there is a kind of disconnect between the media and minority groups there.
Gotcha. So next question, we've got a couple more of these for you. So what does the activist and protest scene look like around your area? I heard you mention there were some charities and some fundraising drives, right? Just what kind of work has been going on in your general area? Just curious.
Well, Pittsburgh has always been very heavy on labor rights and cooperating with each other. I think pretty much all of Appalachia is like that to some extent. And we really band together out in the streets with Planned Parenthood, and we get together and discuss really important implications of what will happen, which I think we will discuss later. We are very active in getting out in the streets, blocking traffic some days. There are some orgs out there trying to block during rush hour as well. There's fundraising going on. There's so much. It's overwhelming in Pittsburgh, which is crazy compared to where I came from, which is we don't care.
Yeah. So actually, I just pulled this up, but this is just footage of the people protesting Roe v. Wade up in Washington. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this on screen real quick. Share with you guys this. Fuck off.
Learning that Roe v. Wade could soon be overturned. Now in Seattle, traffic brought to a standstill as thousands marched through downtown Seattle.
At a different rally across town, lawmakers reaffirmed their commitment to keeping abortions legal in the state. Power 7's Gwen Baumgartner has an update this evening.
Abortion is one of our country's most controversial issues, but today a seemingly united front on two separate occasions. The first, a rally here at Kerry Park, and another at a rally in downtown Seattle. Thousands converging in downtown Seattle.
Yes, this is a blatant attack on people with uteruses.
Women vowing to make their voices heard.
As long as it takes. Every time that it's threatened, we have to come out and protect it.
But these protesters are on the clock, with the Supreme Court expected
Oh,
to
you see that?
Protesters
Freedom Socialist Party. Check that out.
are on the clock.
Got some comrades on the
expected
ground.
to overturn Roe v. Wade next month.
We can't go back to that.
It's a decision that would emanate across the country, immediately banning or restricting abortion in 22 states. Lawmakers were quick to weigh in.
Washington State is a pro-choice state, and we're going to fight. We are going to fight like hell to keep Washington a pro-choice state.
Joining in that fight is Seattle Council member Shama Sawant, who wants to put pressure on justices using
Fucking
mass
trots.
movements like this one that she organized Tuesday.
That is exactly the kind of fear we need to instill right now in the ruling class.
A huge victory was
Let's
leaked
skip
yesterday
around.
and low-income.
We have to think about what else we could lose. This could impact so much.
So yeah, let me see if I can find some good images, see what kind of the turnout's looking like. But yeah, that's 2020. More justice, more peace. These are the BLM protests. Let's see, get better results here. There we go. There we go. That's some good turnout. That's what it's looking like in Washington. So you get the idea. But why is Roe v. Wade important? Why is it so important that this doesn't get overturned? Just hypothetical question. I mean, I know the answer, but I want to hear yours.
So, why does this matter so much?
Yeah. Why is it that, because this doesn't outlaw abortion on a national stage, it just gives the states the freedom to decide whether or not they will permit abortion being legal or illegal. It leaves it to a state level. A good old constitutional freedom. Don't you believe in freedom? What, Lucy Grimm, tell me why you don't believe in freedom. Why shouldn't it be left up to the states?
Okay, first of all, it's the United States. I thought we were supposed to be united at least on something, that being the government being off of our bodies. So never mind that. It's just all a lie. It's all a sham. I think we all know that. Second thing, this matters because so many other civil rights matter because of this decision as well. And it's not up to the government, the state, to decide when I should have an abortion. And like, nobody is waiting like so long into a pregnancy, like morning sickness and all these other things, all this illness, just to have a fucking baby. So that's one thing. The other thing is that it's all just a means of controlling people. It's all a way of artificially growing the population and further impoverishing people to keep the capitalist machine going. And it just further proves how capitalism is unsustainable, and it just relies on human suffering for it to function on any sort of capacity.
Well, yeah, having these reserve pools of labor is beneficial to capitalism because capitalism is constantly trying to grow. And one of the avenues by which that is attained is through growing the population. So abortion is a very shitty way of curbing the reduction in population growth. It's really not that effective because people are just going to go underground. But that's kind of the logic behind it. It's the whole growth ethic, growing the population, which means more consumers, more laborers, new markets to dominate and exploit is the general idea. So the population growing endlessly is beneficial to capitalism. And one of the crises that has occurred in the first world is because population growth is actually starting to be curved and curtailed, and replacement rates for the population are actually falling at, if not slightly below, what is needed to sustain the current population numbers. So what a lot of countries have been doing is taking in immigrants. They've been taking in immigrants so that they can drive down the value of labor, so they can have those reserve labor pools. So immigrants, I mean, in the long term, it's not a sustainable solution, but it just goes to show it all comes back to the growth ethic of capitalism. So otherwise, as you alluded to, this piece of legislation is a crux that is essentially related to a bunch of other civil rights legislation as well. So if Roe v. Wade gets axed, what are the implications of that? How will this affect that other legislation?
Well, there would be no there would be no gay marriage, there would be no interracial marriage. I believe segregation would come back, all kinds of horrible things.
Yeah. So, I mean, you understand it. I mean, a lot of civil rights legislation pertains to that as well. And if you just leave it up to the state, exactly as Ulysses is saying here, it can open the door for other things, banning homosexual marriage and interracial marriage. You're basically opening the door for reactionaries to roll the clocks back on a whole bunch of civil rights gains, like hard fought for and won material gains in decades past. And these are gains that we shouldn't just like throw away. They're things that we should fight to keep and maintain. And it's just fucking bullshit that like we have this arbitrary council of ancient beings from a time long lost who are completely out of touch with the people, completely out of touch with the masses, and they can just arbitrarily decide, we don't like Roe v. Wade. We don't like it. We just don't like it. You know, it offends our 900-year-old sensibilities, and people think Biden's gonna fight to oppose it. Biden is a fucking conservative right-wing asshole, people. He was a fucking segregationist in the 70s. Like, Joseph Biden is an 80-year-old decrepit vampire himself. He too belongs to this ancient caste of elderly beings from a time long lost. He doesn't give a shit about abortion. He doesn't give a shit about gay rights. You know, he just says he does because that's what the Democrats are. It's talk. It's speech. Speech is cheap, and that's the idea. But otherwise, how do you feel about conservative communists who support this, like the so-called Marxists and socialists, these so-called conservatives who are coming out and supporting this?
Supporting the axing of Roe v. Wade?
Or they just don't care, you know? You've got like social conservatives or people that are like hardcore anti-marijuana or anti-abortion as so-called socialists. I'm thinking of people like Maupin and Hawes more than anything else, but
they're not comrades.
What of communists like this?
I'm sorry, they're not comrades. They are idiots, just straight up idiots, and they're giving off big Fed vibes. Just go join the CIA like your parents.
This right here says it all. Beautiful.
Pause. Ugh.
Yeah, so these people are pretty cringe. More than anything else, we should not. The whole Pat socks. I mean, look what it ended up amounting to in practice. The whitewashing of American history, just the straight up denial of historical facts. Ultimately, it just led to revisionism and liberalism and just trying to co-opting of radicals. What's so fucking funny about all these people saying Pat socks are white supremacists while these people are the main pictures used to make our point? Oh, yeah. Again, counter-revolutionary more than anything else, because they take figures and they tokenize figures like the Panthers and MLK and let's see who else, Malcolm X. They tokenize these figures and try to appropriate it to act like these people would have agreed with them. No, they wouldn't. Otherwise, not to make it about these blokes, but I'm trying to make a point here that socialists should absolutely care about this, and that the incorrect answer is to say that you don't care about abortion or don't care about these issues, because these are very much interlinking struggles that go back to the class struggle more than anything else. Because who is this Roe v. Wade shit really going to affect? You know, it's not going to affect rich women. Rich women can just fly to other countries to have abortion. They can just travel to where it's legal to have their abortion. No, this is going to overwhelmingly affect poor and working class women. And they're the ones that are ultimately going to get fucked by this, is my point.
Yes, exactly. And this is primarily going to affect the working class, the poor people, especially people of color who really cannot afford children. And it's just going to lead to this pool of very impoverished people just struggling to live while everything keeps going up, because that's capitalism. And the thing is, people like Caleb Maupin, like Haas, they don't understand because they don't have a uterus. They are just simply chauvinistic men, and they are not comrades. We don't stand for that.
My thing is, like, you don't even need a uterus to understand why this shit's important. Like, seriously. Imagine thinking you could have any sort of revolutionary movement without supporting women and women's rights and just people with uteruses in general. Like, imagine thinking you can have a revolution while actively excluding huge chunks of the working population and their interests. You know, it's craziness, man. It's lunacy. It's insanity. And on another note, in the face of the fact that Joseph Biden, like the Supreme Court, is too a decrepit ancient vampire and an ultra-conservative prick, should we support the Democrats in the face of this when they had the opportune moments back in 2008, 2009 to codify Roe v. Wade, back when they had a supermajority, back when they had the power to do whatever they wanted? The Democrats, they had a supermajority. They could have codified Roe v. Wade then. They could have protected it. And then it would be out of the Supreme Court's hands. They could have gotten a single payer. They could have, used that supermajority to win hard material gains for workers. And time again, they have utterly failed to do so, completely folding and capitulating at every turn and every chance, fundamentally because they don't give a shit. So in the face of that, should socialists be supporting the Democrats? Should we be strategically harm reduction voting? Should we have any sort of support for the Democrats in the future in the wake of this?
I think the answer is a resounding hell no.
Obviously not. And I just said this on a community post too, but anybody who's still shilling for the Dems and claiming to be left at this point should really not be taken seriously in any capacity. Like, if you shill for the Dems, that should be an instant disqualification for that's it, you're done. Nobody's should work with you, nobody should support you, nobody should take you seriously, because fundamentally these people are tools of the ruling class. By supporting the Democrats, by supporting harm reduction, you're a tool of the ruling class, because what happens when people come along and start building the third party alternative, an actual workers alternative? These dipshits are going to come along and be like, no, you're splitting the vote. You're splitting the vote. We have to harm reduce. So in effect, you're just endlessly supporting the Dems. And it just goes to show these people don't actually give a fuck about socialism or building that alternative. They're socialists against socialism. So fundamentally, these people are basically social fascists. And that's what they should be called out for. These fucking social fascists that are married to the Democrats and wants to just endlessly capitulate, these fucking anti-socialists, these anti-communists, they are our enemies, and they should be identified as such and exhumed from the movements.
Preaching to the choir, Trav.
And now it is time to, because I invited a few people to the stream, I'm going to bring in Mr. Touchgrass. Hello, Touchgrass. How are you doing?
Hello. Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Touchgrass.
Awesome,
TG.
awesome. TG. Yeah, that's actually a good one. TG.
We'll call you TG for short.
I'm doing good. Well, I guess I'm doing all right. The country's not doing great, though. Hello, Lucy Grimm.
Hello, how are you doing?
As doing all right.
So, do you have anything you'd like to share on the topic of Roe v. Wade?
Yes, I think that this may be like somewhat of like an accelerationist point or something like that. I think this is gonna fuck over like the stability of the country at the end of the day, because you're basically, because this is for specific, like states, choice to to take this away. But what was the number of countries? Sorry, because it said one of those videos like 20 something. It was like 20, 23, 24, 22. Yeah, so you basically have 22 states. They're gonna end up being like Gilead-esque societies, and it's just gonna increase the familial contradictions that exist within those society, like that exist within those states. And it's something that people are going to realize is, and they're going to realize very quickly, is that we basically live, and I talked to Lucy Grimm about this last night, we basically live in one-party states. Like, sure, the country is, we have two parties, but individual states, most of them just have one party. Like the one I reside in right now, Florida, I'm pretty sure like the last 5 governors and the consensus overall is Republican. And that's going to be like, that's going to lead people to become more radical. And especially now, they basically just gave radicals, women and people, well, queer people have always kind of been way more radical, but just women that have been a lot more divisive are now going to be, they basically just hand them over to the cause, because now they have a very present reason as to why they need to revolt.
Yeah, exactly. People are not just going to lie down and take this. I mean, women in general tend to vote more left-leaning anyways, and it makes sense for obvious reasons why that is, why women tend to vote Democrat, and just they tend to vote more left-wing. And it just really goes to show like the right is not winning, people, in terms of like the masses and the majority of working people. Like right-wing conservative ideology is, when you get down to it, fucking repulsive to your average working person a lot of the time. Like really, when you get down to it, like if you talk to anybody like age 35 or younger, anybody who's like below the age of 35, below the age of 40, basically millennials and Gen Z, most people are repulsed by right-wing ideology. And if it wasn't for things like the Electoral College, as well as like deprivation of education, if it wasn't for active voter suppression, voter purging, electoral fraud, basically, in order for right-wingers like conservatives to win, they have to rig the system to be anti-democratic so that the turnout is kept as low as possible so that the reactionary candidate can win. That's why we have the Electoral College and voter ID laws. If it weren't for these things, Republicans would never win another election again. I promise you that. So, I mean,
yeah,
it's
we'll definitely see that. Oh, sorry, you got it.
Oh, sorry. All I was going to say next was it definitely helps us, and it's definitely beneficial to us. Oh, might be that we that this is happening, because it's just another agitation point that we can use to our favor for further radicalization. Go ahead.
Yeah, on the I guess like on the failure of the conservatives within the United States, we'll see that with other cases today, like with the whole Buffalo shooting. And yeah, it's not, I mean, this, like, if this does pass, it's going to be bad. I'm not, of course it's going to be bad. But I think overall, it just shows that these seem to just be like cries out and attempts to make something that obviously to them is gone. But it's either way, even if they succeed, they're going to lose. They may win the battle, but they're definitely not going to win the war. And them winning this battle is just going to make the war a lot quicker. But you're muted, Trav. Trav?
Oh, fuck,
Yeah.
right. I muted myself because I didn't want to make too much noise. Might be. But as I was saying, yeah, it is definitely going to make our job easier from an agitation and radicalization standpoint. It's just kind of funny to me because I've had, like, we were talking about this last night, but like with my coworkers, how they're basically like super ultra conservative. I mean, that's what you get for basically working for the military industrial complex. I work for a French company contracted out by the US government to build airplane parts. The factory I work in they make commercial airplane parts, but the company I work for, Safran, also builds jet missiles and fighters for the military industrial complex. So I'm basically employed under the MIC. Well, anyways, my coworkers are all ultra conservative, patriotic types, and I'm sitting there having these conversations with these people, trying to explain how it's actually beneficial when you have like free college and free healthcare because you're investing in society. I went into it from like the standpoint of a liberal, talking about investment and returns on investment. I'm like, yo, you guys believe in investment, making your money work for you. And like, yeah, and I'm getting them to nod along with this, right? And I'm explaining, yeah, we can, if we have the GI Bill, for every dollar we invested, we get $7 back because of the value contributed by the veterans going to school for free. And go to single payer healthcare too. You're able to treat sicknesses sooner, preventative medicine, prevent sicknesses from getting too bad. And you have a healthier population that's able to work and to produce. And it's actually less taxing on the medical system in the long run. And I try to explain how it's actually an investment. And when you invest in people and give them what they need, that they will net value back to society much greater than if you were to just have them, bootstrap it. Like if you just had them bootstrap it along, because people are only productive when they're in a position where they can be productive. And even though I explain this very clearly, concisely, and obviously, they immediately go back to, oh, they didn't earn it. They didn't deserve it. And, oh, they didn't earn it. They didn't deserve it. I'm like, the point I'm trying to make has fuck all to do with this moralistic bullshit that you're trying to impose, like that poverty is a moral failing. But there's a point that you guys brought up, and I kind of want to talk about just briefly, but the whole idea that veterans earned it. One conversation that's not really brought up enough is how veterans are really the true welfare queens.
Yeah, I remember we had that conversation last
night. Yeah.
Was it last night or was it the day
Yeah,
before?
yeah, it was last night. About how veterans are the true welfare queens, because like a lot of the times they just join up and they get stationed somewhere and they're just there, pretty much just stationed wherever the hell they are on like an extended vacation trip. People act like these veterans see live combat and they, are actually out there fighting. Vast majority of veterans don't see combat. Most of them don't see combat. They just...
Yeah, and even the combat they may see, it's going to be a lot of, like, they're going to... Basically, it's a massacre. Like, they're going to overwhelmingly destroy the enemy. Like, I remember I had a friend who was in the Navy, and I asked him about, like, oh, did you see anything? And I was like, first I was, like, very... I didn't want to press too hard, because I was like, this guy's seen stuff. This is, like, a couple of years ago. But then he was like, oh, well, no, we saw, like... I don't know, there's like a case of pirates or something like that, and it's just like, shoot a rocket, boom, just fucking blow up. It's like, it's nothing. It's basically like ants to a magnifying glass.
People don't account for the fact that the warfare today is not like it was 70, 80 years ago, like Vietnam. Nowadays, what you have more often than not are people flying death machines, and not even flying the death machine. They're commanding the death machine from a remote location. And the death machine flies around in the sky with no human pilot present, and then it proceeds to drone strike and bomb the shit out of XYZ locations. And usually they're doing so off bad information. So the vast majority of the time, a bunch of innocent people get hurt and killed. It ends up creating more terrorists. And the military-industrial complex does this shit on purpose because it's business. Because by killing and fucking up a bunch of innocent people that you're not really sure are insurgents or not, you can create more terrorists, because those people are going to be resentful because they see the U.S. flag, the Yankee swastika painted on that drone. And then, the terrorists are like, come on, they killed your family, come take up guns. Inshallah, my brother, let us take exact vengeance on the great Satan. So those people turn around and they go and they fight the great Satan. And that's besides the point. The point is like, being a member of the U.S. military has never been safer. Chances are you're going to come out of it alive. And not only that, there's a good chance you'll never see combat. Even when you do, you're usually piloting a drone or or shelling a location from far off distance, from a super safe distance. There's an element of honor that's kind of been lost, because you're no longer fighting and killing people face to face. You're now just killing people that they're not really able to fight back from like the other side of the world. It's kind of fucked up.
The only honor is in like the groups, or I guess, I don't know. I mean, this is a very like weird concept anyway. And I mean, people still find like meaning in being in the military, though I would find that very like questionable. Where that meaning is like valuable. But yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, even it's basic. I don't know if, I mean, everybody here has dealt with like military recruiters, right? Like everyone has, like everyone like has like talked to at least one. And notice that's a part of their advertisement. Their advertisement is not like, do you want to help your country and like do all this hard shit and blah, blah. Their advertisement is, hey, it's easy and you get school and food and healthcare and house. It's like, it's basically like, oh, you get retirement plan. It's a career choice. It's like, I might as well be working for like Amazon or something, like corporate Amazon or some shit.
Yeah, you join the military. That's what they do. They prey on all these young, naive kids that don't know any better, and they offer them all the gibs, all the social fascist gibs that they don't give the general population. And so you sign up for the army, and you play your part in enforcing the global empire for 4 to 8 years. And then when you get out, you basically have it made. You're set for life. You have all of the basic provisions given to you that fucking civilized societies in Europe already give their people on the spot. And the socialist world also gave their people on the spot. But here in America, it's like the carrot. They wave the carrot over your head. And again, yeah, just like you said, it's not, do you want to serve your country? Honor, blah, blah, blah. No, most people that go in the military go into it because they know they're getting the social fascist gibs. So that's pretty much what it comes down to. And when they get out, yeah. So that's why I say this, that people in the army, they're the real welfare queens. And when you look at poverty statistics, most people that are collecting welfare checks are working full time, but they're not being paid enough to pay all their bills on their own. So they need to get food stamps. They need to get welfare, and they need to be subsidized off of our tax dollar, because their private employer doesn't pay them enough to take care of themselves. So they not only do they have to work full time, they also have to collect checks. So that doesn't sound like a welfare queen to me, not in the least bit, especially when you consider that the vast majority of welfare recipients are children. So every time you hear these fucking Republican fucks talking about taking away and slicing welfare and food stamps, what they're really talking about is taking food out of the mouths of hungry children and moralizing poverty as a bad thing. And the fact that like you can just go and join the army and you can get all those exact same benefits. People are like, oh, well, you earned them. You didn't. You didn't fucking earn shit. You volunteered to fucking oppress black and brown people at and below the equator. That's all you did. You did your part in enforcing the big dick evil empire. Sorry. Sorry if that touches a nerve. That is the truth.
Well, yeah, I think most people here would agree with you. But Lucy Green, do you have anything to add on that?
I don't think the military or anyone who signs up for the military are the true welfare queens if you take into account corporate subsidies.
Well, if you want to go even deeper, landlords and corporations are even big. They're the biggest of the welfare queens. I just wanted to go through that common Republican talking point that I've heard 1 trillion times. But yeah, no. Amazon, there have been years where companies like Amazon have net received money in taxes. And a lot of oil companies receive millions of dollars in subsidies. Wall Street, every time they fuck the economy, they end up getting bailed out to the tune of trillions of dollars. Fuck the economy, fuck over countless people, and you're going to receive a bonus. You know, but if you get caught smoking a joint, or, you know, you collect welfare checks or use food stamps and try to rely on some sort of social benefits or safety net at all, and you haven't participated in the evil empire, then, oh, morally you're a bad person. You aren't really like earning your way out. You haven't fought your way out, you know. It's crazy, but people don't realize like the implications of this mindset where you like criminalize and moralize poverty and treat it like it's a moral failing. In doing so, you can justify a whole lot of fucked up shit. You can justify treating people like shit, not actually addressing social alienation. You can justify a lot of racism too, because you see all these black and brown people that are poor. If poverty is a moral failure, and most black and brown people are poor, that means most black and brown people are by extension morally failing. They're just, you know, they're inferior. They're not working hard enough. They're lazy. So that's exactly how you can justify a lot of really racist and bigoted views. And this beautifully paints the whole personal responsibility to fascism pipeline. I think it paints it very well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we can go ahead and move on since you guys don't have anything else to say on that. It's all good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up the Wikipedia article. And speaking of fascism and speaking of white supremacy, we're going to talk about the Buffalo shooting.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
So every time I sit down, I blink, fart, put somebody in a headlock while I'm doing jujitsu, there will have been another report on a mass shooting where some alienated young white dude who spends a little too much time on 4chan and listens to a little too much Candace Owens, Steven Crowder, and Tucker Carlson writes a 900-page manifesto, talks about, you know, the Jewish question, the Great Replacement, the white genocide, and his fear of black and brown people, and how he was inspired by all these right-wing talking heads. And then he says, all right, time to go out in a blaze of glory. And he goes out, grabs a gat, massacres a bunch of innocent people, and either dies or gets arrested. It literally happens all the fucking time. So, yeah, on May 22nd, mass shooting occurred in Buffalo, New York, at a Top Friendly Market store, a supermarket in Kinsley neighborhood. The accused, identified as an 18-year-old Peyton S. Gendron, was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. Gendron is reported to have written a manifesto describing himself as a white supremacist, ethno-nationalist, and national socialist motivated to commit political violence. He supported the far-right Great Replacement conspiracy theory in the context of a supposed white genocide. The attack has been described as an act of domestic terrorism, and the incident being investigated is racially motivated. Governor Kathy Tool promised policy changes in the state as a result of the attack while condemning the shooter and consoling the victims' families. So, anywho, so yeah, he, as it turns out, he has a manifesto, and from what I've heard, he's mentioned Tucker Carlson in it, and he's mentioned what's her name, blonde bitch, blonde great replacement bitch. I don't remember her name.
Lauren Southern.
Lauren Southern, right?
I was like blonde, and fucking conservative. That doesn't. That's not very particular.
So,
yeah.
So isn't it funny? There's like a pattern here, because in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been several other shooters with the exact same motivations as this guy that have done the exact same things. They're just targeting locations with ethnic minorities, and they've been radicalized by the rhetoric of the far right. I'm seeing a pattern here, and I'm wondering why the fuck no one's talking about this. Like, everyone wants to talk about the liberals want to look at this through the lens of gun control. The conservatives want to just pretend there's no problems, and they want to say, "Oh, we shouldn't politicize this." But like, we, the woke here on the left, recognize this as a trend of white supremacy being enabled by white supremacists.
Yeah, I think no one's talking about it because of, I guess, the implications that has for basically like what state we're in, and what state we're in this country. Because I think all of them are these extremely alienated white dudes, and they get radicalized online. But again, I think it honestly just, I think what's the craziest thing here is how this is kind of the best that these alienated people have. Like, we don't have militias or anything like that. Like, you would think that, okay, think about this for a second. Think about all of those people who are just like this guy, but didn't go and shoot people, and they're on 4chan shit. And they literally have a system. They have 4chan and Discord and all these different places where they can, meet up and coordinate and do some really, can do a lot of damage. But it ends up just being these lone wolf shooters. Why? Right?
Because they have no sense of solidarity or unity among one another. They're individual acts of terror that are sporadically inspired by these white nationalists, these white supremacists. They don't have any sense of solidarity or goodwill. It's literally just the grifters leading the grifted. A lot of these fucking right-wing pundits, many of them are not true believers in their own bullshit. They're just saying what they do because they know it nets the money. They're all grifters. But anywho, it's pretty much, it basically comes down to that. They have no sense of solidarity or unity amongst one another for all their proclamations of racial solidarity. And when you get down to it, they're just lashing out like spoiled children that are upset because they don't have the same standing that they used to as straight white cis men back during the 1960s and 1970s. So they're lashing out. The world is changing. New things bad, old things good become Nazi. And yeah, they could coordinate and do a lot more fucking damage. And you're probably going to see that a lot more when the going really gets tough, when a socialist threat really starts to come on the rise, like a real socialist counterculture and revolutionary movement. You're going to find a lot of these fringe cults and LARPers are going to be given blank checks by mysterious, anonymous, big money donations to basically do whatever they want. It's the way the Nazis became relevant. The Nazis were a completely irrelevant cult, basically, when they started. And because they started getting subsidies, millions of marks in subsidies from the government, and they were propelled to a national stage as a serious force to be reckoned with. And it just goes to show that money talks. Money talks, and money buys you power and influence. So they're not relevant now, but they will be when socialism starts to rear its ugly head and threaten capitalism again. So you'll
So
start
you think
seeing
like,
those more coordinated terror attacks when that happens.
yeah, I don't, yeah, perhaps, but I guess I also just feel like usually if you're funding a group like that, they're already like, up and doing shit. They're already like some kind of force that is present within society, but this isn't a force. This is like individual acts of like death initiation. Whether it be like a social death through, through imprisonment and ostracization, is that the word? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, physical death through suicide or being killed by the police, whatever it may be. I mean, there are like places they can go that believe in their ideology. Like, I mean, the Aryan Brotherhood's still a thing, right? All of these like white supremacist groups that exist throughout the United States are still, present, but they don't, they don't go to them because I don't think they really have an interest in organizing. I think all of the ideas of organizing are just a LARP. But a one interesting note, I think, is how this relates. I don't want to get too much into cultural analysis, but how this relates to a lot of memes that you see. And I mean, probably like many of us have partaken in some of these memes because they're so pervasive. Things like, like the Patrick Bateman memes, or like, Anton Chigurh. Actually, I think Anton Chigurh is on this is
He
on the
is.
thumbnail here, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
I missed
So,
the mark. I missed the mark because I should have made one of the Supreme Court heads Patrick Bateman. That would have been very appropriate. But
yeah, I think the problem though is that they want to be those, like, a lot of people want to be those things, or kind of like, it's the whole "that's so me" idea.
the
Um,
badass psychopath who kills all these people because
yeah, but
they're such terminal losers. They feel so downtrodden in defeat and so worthless and so inferior. That's really what it comes down to. These people are inferior. And even if it's for like 30, 45 minutes, if they can feel like a winner, they can feel like a badass, and all they got to do is murder a bunch of innocent people. That
I
can't.
mean, yeah, that's often what where it all comes from at the end of the day. I mean, this is like what is essential to rape? It's it's power. Um, and I think, but I think what's interesting is that with those two cases, they're probably the Patrick, these people are not like Patrick Bateman's. They're not even what Bret Easton Ellis, the guy who wrote American Psycho, was trying to, show with that. They're not Anton Chigurh. It's not what Cormac McCarthy was showing. And just to bring up one piece of literature, I won't go too much into it, but for anybody who wants to, read this, the guy who wrote the novel, which was the basis for No Country for Old Men, Cormac McCarthy, of course, he was famous for The Road as well. He wrote, what's the book called? Child of God. I think it was in the 60s or 70s he wrote it, or published it. And I think that's probably the greatest, the main character, Lester Ballard, is probably the greatest example. And that work goes into a lot of like alienation and how society like alienates these men. It's, of course, it's somewhat sympathetic, but it shows like, how stupid it all is, and how pointless it is. And yeah, there's a lot to it. There's a whole bunch of analysis. There's videos online about it, so you can check it out. But that's my little recommendation. Child of God, Cormac McCarthy. Pretty short book. It's like 160, 30 pages, something like that.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking a lot about though is just really the absurdity of it. I'm not gonna lie with you guys. There was a time when I spent some time within the alt-right fascist vortex a long time ago. I was about 17, 18 years old, young, alienated, misogynistic, right-wing doucher, reactionary, ignorant kid back when I was like 17. And I used to surf those boards like 4chan and that sphere of the internet. And I mean, there was a brief time when I actually did buy into the white supremacist conspiracies to some extent. But what ultimately turned me away from it is really just like the absurdity and the cruelty of it, and really just like how auto-deceptive it all was. Like, you basically had to lie to yourself and lie to other people in order to be into it. And after a certain point, I just kind of realized that it was just all fucking bullshit. Because, like, here's the thing, man. There's more white people now than ever in human history. There are more white people on Earth today than there were hundreds of years ago. And if you look at, like, the racial, I'm using their definition of white, and if you look at like the racial makeup and composition of countries in Latin America, if countries at and below the equator, you'll actually find that like the racial composition in a lot of these countries that were traditionally not white have a lot more white people than they used to. Like, there are white people all over the planet. There's more of them now than ever before. There are billions of white people on planet Earth. And there will probably continue to be billions of white people for thousands of years to come. So the whole narrative of white genocide doesn't make any fucking sense. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's been whites, really just the European colonists and colonizers, that have been the ones doing all the genocide. Look at what happened to the natives, man. Native Americans are what percentage of the population now? They're the ones that have been victims of genocide.
Like 3.
Yeah.
Like 2
So,
or
like,
3.
So it just goes to show, I feel like a lot of this is just like fascist projection. And I think a lot of it comes down to them just being afraid. One aspect of this is just them being afraid what their ancestors did to non-white people of the world is what non-white people are going to come back and do to them. And the chicken's coming home to roost. It's the same reason why people are against decolonization. They're afraid of retribution being carried out against the descendants of colonizers, which is why they oppose it, because they're afraid that what their ancestors did to them, they're afraid that's going to come back and happen to them. That's basically what white genocide is and what it's all about. It's literally just based on pure fear and impulse more than anything else. Also, IQ statistics are bullshit.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, this is also like older than dirt. A book that I talked with Trav about, that is very dense, but you can, I would still recommend like reading through it, or at least like getting parts of it. The Counter-Revolution of 1776 by Gerald Horne. He's a Black Marxist scholar, and he's still alive, contemporary, and it talks about how basically there was a lot of these conspiracy theories and ideas that basically slaves would rise up. This was before the American Revolution, and this is kind of like what made it. They would rise up and they would start enslaving, white people. Basically, like, they believed the tables were going to be turned. Even though when we do see a black slave revolution actually occur, which was in Haiti, that never even happened. If anything, like, they were just killed, not including Poles, and I think Germans. I forgot like what other ethnicities. It was primarily the French population that were killed off because, of course, they were enslaving them. That kind of tends to happen if yeah, you know how it is.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with it. It's just I need to check it out. It's on a very long list of books that I've yet to check out, but I'm all too aware.
But it brings up particular instances where they're afraid of this, and this was, I mean, before the Civil War, like, because of the Haitian Revolution, people were worried. They were like, "Oh shit! If we keep having slaves, and if the slave population increases, oh my god, then they're gonna, the tables are gonna be turned. The tables are gonna be turned." It's honestly a worry that basically is kind of probably fundamental to class society. It's that, apocalyptic concern that what if everything like falls apart and
the thing is that
and they get fucked over.
That retribution usually only ends up getting carried out because like the oppressors just hold on to their power to the desperate bitter end. Like, that's the reason why the king in the King Francis and his family ended up getting killed. That's why the czars and their family ended up getting killed. It's because, like, there have been instances where monarchs have stepped down peacefully. and then they just let go of their positions. Like that has happened. Like there are instances, they're sparse, but like the kind of retribution that they're talking about could be completely just circumvented and avoided if they didn't just fight to the bitter end against the forces of progress and the forces of socialism. So, and even then, like, however much violence or retribution is carried out against oppressors is always like 5% what the oppressors have carried out in the direction of the oppressed, it being like exponentially more is what I'm trying to say. Like, the violence needed to maintain capitalism is about 10 to 20 times the violence necessary for overthrowing capitalism and establishing socialism. I would go as far as to say is 100 times, 200 times more, because the ruling class are not going to fucking give up their wealth peacefully. It's not going to happen. They're going to fight to the bitter end. So,
but I think like just all this concern is probably less based in reality now compared to, back in, in the 1700s or something, because of course something like Haiti occurred because it was a, like, well, I'm not saying this as a pun, but I guess it's okay, pun not intended, but it's blatantly black and white, right? It's like you're either slave. I mean, there was like little bits in the middle, but you're basically just either a slave or a master, or like descended from masters and like directly employed by the master. That's it. But in our society, like the average black person, indigenous person is not going to like have it out for any white person, right? That doesn't happen, obviously. Like, so this fear is completely unfounded and artificially concocted by these sites, and honestly also by but here's the biggest problem, because, and this is why I think even Democrat-backed media doesn't get into it, is because both Democrat-backed and Republican-backed media made this. Because all of these news sites, they even if they're not trying to specifically, they still end up making this idea that white people are decreasing, and black people and all non-white people are just trying to kill everybody or hurt everybody. It's and they use that, right? Like, they don't make these conspiracy theories like out of nowhere. They're not just making up a bunch of bullshit. They base it on the bullshit that's already being given to us every single day through news. So the blood is on their hands as well. It's on CNN, Fox News hands as much as it is on these 4chan people.
Yeah, of course. They sensationalize it. They capitalize on it because they know that death sells. And the way that they talk about these, they almost present a lot of these mass shooters like, yeah, they'll give the token, oh, I condone this. This is bad. It's not good that this happened. But they almost like portray mass shooters a lot of the time as though they're outlaws, as though they're like, these badass desperado types. And that I think that what the media should really be doing is instead of putting the shooter's name and his face all across national television and giving this person 45 minutes of fame, how about instead of that, you have that person's name and face be public knowledge, but you don't have the news show it. Instead, the news shows all of the people that were killed and injured by this person, who they are, what they brought to society, and what society has lost because of it. And in doing so, I feel like it would inadvertently discourage and bring some sort of cultural pushback against shooters, and it would bring attention to the issue. I mean, really, it's a social ill. It's a social ill that cannot be addressed because capitalism actively, like the establishment status quo, actively enables, embeds, and entrenches that sort of behavior in psychology. And because of free speech, they're never going to ban all the fucking conservative right-wing talking heads that are constantly violating the TOS on YouTube, for one. Like, they constantly violate it. But the other side of it is, like, they're the ones that program these young guys and fill their heads full of bullshit in the first place. Like the Candace Owens, Tucker Carlsons, the Steven Crowders. Why aren't they being held accountable? Why aren't like these people being held to some serious scrutiny? Because when the fucking mass shooters are referencing you and your rhetoric, like that should be a cause for concern. Like I'm surprised there's no conversation about banning these motherfuckers off the platform, because most of what they say is just fake news anyways. Like, seriously. They got to put their own fucking, and it's because they benefit the ruling class. That's solely what it comes down to. They benefit the ruling class. It's actually in the interests for the ruling class to keep fascists on a leash, because they can, do a deal with the devil and prop up those fascists against the socialists when need be. Right now, the status quo has been successful in perpetually co-opting and recuperating socialist rhetoric and socialist aesthetics and energy, and turning it into something that fundamentally does not pose a threat to power. So the conversation at hand that needs to be had is talking about socialists building power. And so this is the advantage we have over the right wing. We know these things are going to happen, and we actually have a sense of solidarity and a vision, like a scientific vision on making the world a better place. So that's what we have going for us. So in the long run, the right wing is destined to fail. They will always be destined to fail. Every single one of their projects have either ended stupendously bad, completely collapsed, or just went back to being liberalism. That's what's happened every time. Fascism doesn't last longer than like a couple decades at the most. It's just unsustainable. It's unsustainable. So yeah. Next up, I got a few other topics. You guys want to talk about Finland joining NATO, inflation, or how Russia has been handling these sanctions? So I got a few different directions we can go with that.
Yeah, Lucy, do you have any thoughts on which we should go for?
Hell with it. Whatever you guys want to do.
I think probably I wouldn't have much to say on Finland. I mean, I don't know if Lucy Grimm, you have anything to say on Finland. I don't really have I don't have as much geopolitical knowledge as I would like. Probably inflation would be good, because that kind of relates to like the everyday,
All right. So here's what I'll do. I'll go ahead and we'll briefly skim over Finland, since I know you guys have a lot to say. Here's what I'll say about Finland. First, I'm going to read some excerpts from this article. So, Finland Parliament approves proposal to join NATO. The Finnish Parliament voted Wednesday to approve its government proposal to join NATO, with just 12 lawmakers out of 200 dissenting. The same day, Russia announced it is permanently ending its participation in the Council of the Baltic Seas, an 11-member intergovernmental organization tasked with managing issues related to security and economic development in the region. As Finland, along with Sweden, formally submitted their NATO membership application yesterday, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Moscow released a statement declaring the governments of NATO and the European Union in the CBSS have rejected equal dialogue and the principles upon which this regional structure in the Baltics was built, and are consistently transforming it into an instrument of anti-Russian policy. It describes the atmosphere in CBSS as one of Russophobia and lies. So, the Baltic Sea is now actually turning into a NATO lake, which will require a retaliatory measure to build up the Russian naval presence in the area, air defenses and land bases, missile systems, and so on. He said, with the line of contact between Russia and NATO doubling should Finland's application for admission to the Transatlantic Alliance be approved, Moscow will have to militarize its northwestern border to a new level, dramatically beefing up its forces in Karelia around Murmansk. The breakdown of CBSS, which was formed in '92 with the express purpose of promoting interstate cooperation in the post-Soviet era, is a manifestation of the crisis gripping the global order as the US and NATO go barreling headfirst towards world war. On Wednesday, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent the Duma a list of proposed international organizations from which the country may withdraw. It includes the World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, along with at least 10 others. Already, the 14 WTO members have ended Russia's status as a most favored nation trade partner. And let's see what else. Canada, the US, and Scandinavian countries have suspended their participation in all meetings, which is currently chaired up by Russia and charged with responsibilities similar to those of the Council of the Baltic Sea States. In a statement on Wednesday, Nikolai Patrushev, head of Russia's Security Council, described the contemporary state of affairs as, quote, an unprecedented geopolitical crisis, unquote, and charged the US and NATO with provoking the collapse of the global architecture of security and the international system of laws and agreements. He insisted that the West policies threaten Russia's statehood and very existence, and that the conflict over Ukraine has been used to conduct an undeclared war against Russia. So, one more thing. In an opinion piece published the same day, the editorial board of the Washington Post demanded that the war in Ukraine continue and that efforts to negotiate a ceasefire be halted. While recent efforts on the part of France, Germany, and Italy to end the bloodshed were understandable, opened the newspaper, the risk of relaxing the pressure on Mr. Putin before he's thoroughly beaten and maybe not even enough are too high, emphasis added. It insisted that Paris, Berlin, and Rome not let their desire to shorten this destructive war and thus limit the damage to both Ukraine and their own hard-pressured economies stand in the way. So here's what I have to say about that. Finnish people are not voting to join NATO. Finbull talked about this in a video, but most Finlanders, people from Finland, the Finnish, don't want to join NATO. Yeah, I know, I botched that, but they don't want to join NATO. They're not voting to join NATO. The Finnish parliament is. And this is kind of a bipartisan agreement. Both the left and right wing within Finnish government want to join NATO because they say they're worried about their security. And the thing is it has fuck all to do with security. It's a fear-based policy that is only going to escalate tensions even further. And I can tell you exactly why that is, guys. You guys want to know why this is going to spike tensions exponentially? I'll show you right here. This is the reason why. Right here. There's Finland. What's right next door? Russia. So...
Wow, Finland is that urban?
Yeah, Finland is right next to Russia. So one of the agreements in World War II was with the forming of NATO was that Finland would not join NATO, basically. Finland would remain a neutral state over the course of the Cold War because of the perimeters and location surrounding the Russian border. So no matter who is in control of Russia and the Russian Empire, or be it the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, or the modern Russian Federation, because of the geography and topology of Russia's border, it is actually within the interests of Russia to have as much defense as possible and even maintain buffer states in the form of alliances. So Soviet Union the Soviet Union was in a highly advantageous position because Finland was neutral, and all the way up to East Germany, Russia had all of these buffer states in the way. So that were, part of the communist bloc, the Warsaw Pact. So if and with the Brezhnev doctrine in place, if one of them would get attacked or get threatened with counter-revolution, they would all basically go in to rebuff that threat of attack or counter-revolution. Russia was in a much secure, stronger, and stable position 30, 35 years ago, back when it was the USSR. And after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the modern-day Russian Federation, Russia has never been weaker and more vulnerable because all those buffer states are now vassals to the EU. All those bodies are now going to be fighting on behalf of Western Europe instead of Russia. Russia is experiencing a demographic crisis. Their population is collapsing and shrinking. So they have a much smaller population, a less advanced military, and they are outnumbered by like a factor of 10 to 1 by NATO and the European Union. And so to put it mildly, Russia's pretty fucked. And it is within the interests of Western Europe because they're a rival geopolitical threat or perceived threat. Western Europe basically wants to destroy Russia, and that's what this is all about. So for Finland to join NATO would be really bad for Russia's national security, and it would exponentially spike tensions, because then they'd be able to move NATO troops and armaments and warheads with fast maneuvers, basically rapid attack type military formations that can deep strike into Russian territory and hit all of Russia's like major infrastructure with ICBMs before Russia can form a meaningful counteroffensive. So this is the reason why like Ukraine joining NATO was such a big deal for security reasons, and why Russia moved in to annex the Black Sea and the Crimea, because they're not about to let their enemies have like such a vulnerable strategic point, is my point. So with this happening, this is going to escalate tensions even further. And if a war breaks out in Finland, like Russia just goes to war with Finland, the West isn't going to give a shit. The West is going to love it, because now Russia's fighting two wars, and now there's another proxy state, which the West can just use as a sacrilegious lamb to weaken the Russian military. They want to sustain the war in Ukraine as much as possible, which is why they're pumping all this lethal aid into it. That's the whole point. By pumping all that lethal aid into Ukraine, they can prolong the conflict as much as possible and wear down on Russia's resources and their military assets and weaken them. And that's also the point of the sanctions, which we will get to later. So yeah, that's basically what's going on with that. And if Finland does join NATO, we will be a step closer to World War III. So
wait, so you're saying that basically like the politicians and the bourgeois of Finland just put the whole country up for, up on the silver platter, or not up on a silver platter, but up for the slaughter?
They will be, potentially, because it's actually a lot better for Finnish security if they stay neutral. Really, a lot of this just comes down to fear-based politics. NATO has received a fuck ton of legitimacy in the wake of the war in Ukraine. Prior to that, NATO was seen as legitimate, and a lot of countries were siding with NATO, saying like, oh, we need protection from Russia. We need protection from Russia. But in doing so, in siding with NATO, they have only increased tensions even further, because NATO was originally an anti-communist alliance. Now it's basically it's a pro-Europe, anti-Russian alliance. It's an imperialist institution that fights on the interests of Western Europe. So by acting on this impulse, this fear-based reaction to try and be a part of NATO, all they've done is put them in a much more dangerous position, because now Russia is going to start moving troops and military presence up to the Finnish border. Do I think Russia will invade Finland? I don't know, but it could happen. And if it does, that's scary, because these are two wars that are happening incredibly close to the NATO bloc countries. And World War III could be on the horizon because of something like this. This is how like these developments compound onto one another, and how we end up with world wars. Like World War I and World War II didn't just happen in a vacuum. There were a series of events which were unfolding prior to that, which led to the eventual buildup of worldwide conflict. And we are seeing a buildup very similar to that happening before our very eyes. And it's scary shit. Very scary shit.
It's fucking weird.
That's crazy. Good to know that I was born at the right time for all this to go down.
Yeah. And if it happens, we were also talking about this off air yesterday, but I was talking about how I believe that if World War III does happen, it's not going to be a very long war. I'd say within the first couple of years, it would probably be coming to an end, because with modern military armaments, we have advanced our destructive capacity to an exponentially greater degree than ever before. So in modern warfare, assuming nukes aren't involved, if you take out nukes, it's going to be drones, it's going to be tanks, and it's going to be armaments, ordnance that are piloted and used from a remote location. Wars are going to be fought with, it's going to be over air superiority. You're going to see drones, jets, you'll see tanks, and you'll see troops moving in as well. But the country with the better air superiority and the more technologically advanced death machines, which can be piloted from a remote location so you don't have to worry about casualties, is the country that's going to have the edge. And all it's really going to take is hundreds of millions of people dying within an incredibly short period of time, being fed to the grinder, before eventually everyone just gets tired of fighting and something happens. Because when world wars happen, socialist rhetoric and socialism becomes 100 times more appealing to people, because we're the side that's fundamentally anti-war and pro-peace. So again, these developments are only going to make our jobs as agitators easier over time, because we can use it to undermine the credibility and legitimacy of the institutions which the general public perceives as credible and legitimate. And once serious blows have been done from an image standpoint to these institutions' credibility and legitimacy, people are going to become a great deal more open to an alternative. And it's up to us to build that alternative. So, anywho.
Crazy shit.
We can move on.
It's gonna be like the 7-hour war from fucking Half-Life.
Yeah, pretty much. The war starts, and then countless people die, and then people eventually get tired of fighting because, the grocery stores are all empty. Food is way more expensive. Gas is like $20 a gallon. Regular everyday life is now unbearable. My neighbors keep disappearing. All of our young men and boys are all disappearing. There's, damage, shelling, bombing. America has never been shelled or bombed by an outside invading force. Americans do not know the true terror of an invading army coming to fucking wreck your shit. They don't know what that terror is like. They never have.
The last time that happened was 1812.
They only know what it is like to be the bully with an unfair advantage. So for all the bravado, in their hearts, they are cowards. And I think while morale would be high if our country was invaded, outside of the country, morale will go to shit once we start losing in any of these conflicts. The modern U.S. military, with all of its advanced technology and armaments, is far from invincible. So, and it's been defeated before, and it can be defeated again. But anyways, inflation. What do you guys know about inflation?
Oh, you mean corporate greed?
Yeah, I've talked about inflation in a video a little while ago, but I want you guys to voice your thoughts.
Oh boy, well, I think this whole inflation stuff is all just one big excuse to charge more money for basically, they just want more money. The CEOs want more money, and they're using this fucking war as an excuse. They're like, oh, well, cooking oils is going to be more expensive too because we got some from Ukraine. Bullshit, you got that much from Ukraine. Bullshit.
What about you, Bunny Tooth? You got anything to say?
Damn.
That's right, I'm putting you on the spot today.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't exactly. Well, it's okay. I guess it's not exactly like just. I mean, of course, like inflation is a bit more organic than people like to say, but I think the fact that how much it's not being helped has honestly surprised me and makes me kind of wonder. Okay, obviously everybody, here's the main thing that people are thinking about. If you have a car, of course, which I'm guessing most people here, you have a car, or at least had a car. Gas prices. In some places, that shit is $6 to $7.
Gas
And it's
is
just going up.
in some areas, like Fortune, in this Fortune article. I'm going to go ahead and show this real quick, but we will stop sharing you, and then we're going to go to another tab I have open. Washington gas station reprogrammed pumps for $10 per gallon, but it's not for the reason you think. Oh, really? It's not for the reason you think. Articles are trying to deny that gas is going to hit $10 a gallon and that it's going to get that expensive right now. There's a lot of articles that are arguing that. But if you've got pumps and parts of the country that are anticipating further price hikes, because where I'm at, I've seen gas between $4.49 to $5 a gallon. So $4.50 to $5 a gallon and rising. And so I don't think it'll get like this everywhere, but I do believe there are going to be parts of the country, like in Washington, New York, and California, places where inflation is at its worst, where gas is going to climb to $10 or more a gallon. So,
which is like, fuck that. Like, I'm not going to. I'm just not going to live there then. Like, fuck that.
So,
holy shit.
While race fuel is dispensed from a separate pump than traditional automotive fuel, the system requires all pumps to be reprogrammed. Ironically, that change is actually resulting in slightly cheaper gas. Gas stations typically add 9 to 10 cents onto prices, but Auburn Station has done away with that after reprogramming the pumps for 10. Gas prices have been increasing steadily, but not even the most bearish forecasters have predicted $10 per gallon. But the thing is like it's climbing with no end in sight. And a lot of economists are actually predicting that inflation and the consumer price index won't stabilize until like 2025, 2026. Like that, like prices are going to keep rising for the next 3 to 4 years before they finally stabilize.
Yeah. I think something that's really funny to me, in a cruel sense, is how, for some weird reason, even though we live in this, guys, we live like in this world where every, 7 to 10 years, or is it like, I forgot exactly. It's like always 7 to 10, right? 7 to 10 years we have a recession. But when it's not happening, everyone's like, they basically they act as if recessions don't exist. But the moment it happens, they're like, what the fuck? Like, what? What's going on here? Why is there a recession? This doesn't make any sense. And we've just been in an overall downturn since 2008. Like, it hasn't really climbed back up to pre-2008, just pre-2008 stability or prosperity. And you can even go back even as far as like 2001 with the dot-com crash. But I think just like the everyday, I'm really wondering how it's going to affect on the everyday, because it's getting to the point where food and water, and of course like even buying a house, which members of my family have had to deal with, and it's been disastrous. And I come from like a pretty petite bourgeois background, so it's surprising how fucked it all is, and how like everyone's they're just really waiting for that for everything to stabilize. But yeah, like if that's the case, then we may not even have stability until years later. And if that is the case, if the case is that's going to be years from now, I don't think we're going to last. I think shit's going to, not exactly collapse, but it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, life will become so unbearable that people will have no choice but to actually like come together and do something about it. Unfortunately, due to the utter lack of a left, due to an utter lack of theory, due to really just any sort of existing alternative being existing, it's just going to manifest I just see it manifesting as more lashing out from the public, more protesting, more rioting, martial law being called in various parts of the country. The only good thing that the left has going for it in America in the wake of this is the fact that it is going to be way easier to radicalize and agitate people. I mean, rates of agitation or radicalization rates are already through the roof right now. More than anything else, they're already through the roof. So I think we'll have that going for us.
Also, people are pretty, smart. I think at the end of the day, they'll try to find. I think what I'm more interested in how people are going to not react in terms of anger and like trying to make overall change, but how are they going to change their own lives? So, for example, if gas costs so much, are we going to see more people like sell their cars? But the problem is, how do you get to work? Would they even have a fucking job? Like, are we going to go back to Hoovervilles? Are we going to have like, these little, uh, these like homeless? I mean, we do have already like homeless, I guess communities and like roving bands of like homeless people, places like California, but is that going to increase? Are we just going to see that same trend, but it's just going to be, we're going to see even more people within it? Like, what's going to happen?
Here's the thing. It's possible that Hoovervilles make a comeback. It's also possible that the government steps in and right in the nick of time introduces much needed economic relief to the general population, kicking the can down the road, because so far that's been the main tactic they've employed, is just putting off dealing with it. So I think what you'll see is not necessarily rent forgiveness, but I think you'll see like moratoriums for rent being extended pretty much indefinitely. I think you'll see companies raising wages just enough to get people to show back to work. I think you'll see an equalization of the wages of a lot of jobs, because like a lot of manufacturing and like traditionally labor aristocrat and high skilled labor places are not paying as much relative to fast food and merchandising. So like I work and I make about 18 an hour doing what I do. Well, I'm starting to see Wendy's and McDonald's and Walmart having positions or starting off at like 14, 15 an hour. I'm seeing them advertising positions that pay as high as $21, $22 an hour. And I'm like, well, shit, dude, I'm driving a half hour to and from work every single day. And gas is as expensive as it is, maintenance being what it is, just the costs of owning a vehicle and traveling. If fucking the Kroger down the street is now hiring for like 18 an hour or like 17 an hour, or like XYZ retail place or like local, like a job within walking or biking vicinity is now paying close to what I make now, I may as well quit my job and go work there instead, because I'd be losing money relative to where I work at with respect to the cost of transportation. And it's just crazy, because if we had some sort of mass public transit, like even if it was just like a half measure, if we just had like public buses and trolleys and trains, like we had some sort of mass public transit of some kind that was able to take large groups of people and take them to where they want to go, because most people are going in the same direction, then we, by reducing demand and the need for automobiles, we could by extension reduce the demand for gasoline. But companies don't want that. Gas and oil companies are making record profits, and because our infrastructure has been castrated and lobotomized and completely centered around accommodation of the automobile since the 60s and 70s, since all of our transportation and just general infrastructure is designed very inefficiently and shitty wise with respect to energy, resource, and space usage, It's incredibly atomizing and isolating. Suburbs are very alienating. But not only that, but it like makes it so that you quite literally need a car in order to get anywhere. You've got traffic jams, you've got car accidents. Like, we would be so much better off if we had some public transit. And this is the question that needs to be raised, because we are now facing $10 a gallon, threatening $10 a gallon. And the first thing on people's minds isn't, why don't we have mass public transit? Why is it that transportation is purely and solely a private service? So the question and the conversation that needs to be had, as with everything else, is decommodification, because the market economy just can't do it anymore. Like, we really need to move off of a market economy. And that is like where we need to be when we're doing our advocacy. So if you guys don't have anything to say, I'm just going to read some excerpts from this article.
Yeah, go ahead.
Last month, the World Bank estimated that food prices will increase by 23% this year, driven largely by a spike in global wheat prices. This ties into the war in Russia, since Russia, being a big wheat exporter, is being sanctioned. A lot of the major producer is off the market. So a lot of these other countries, like, demand is up, reduce supply, prices go up. And mind you, Russia was a big exporter to a lot of countries in northern Africa, like around Egypt, around the border of the Middle East, around the border of the Mediterranean. A lot of these countries imported wheat from Russia, and being unable to do that, they have to import their wheat from elsewhere and other places, driving up that demand. So wheat prices globally are on the rise as a result. So also rates of radicalization, because when food's too expensive and you get all these poor countries where life's barely bearable, and it goes from barely bearable to unbearable, that also paves the way for revolutions as well. And I think we're going to see a wave of revolutions in our lifetime in the wake, but I digress. The Food Price Index, which tracks monthly changes in the international prices of basket foods of commodities such as sugar, dairy, cereal, and vegetable oil, is 30% higher than in April 2021. The United States, the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that overall food prices rose 10% last month, and meat costs are 20% higher than in 2021. Boy, is that true. Steaks have never been more expensive. And stick around here. As soon as I get through this article, I'm going to give you guys some tips and some pointers on how you can get around these expensive prices in trying times. Hard times, anyways. I'm going to tell you how you can do it, and I'm going to tell you that you shouldn't do it because it's illegal. All I'm doing is explaining a way in which you can subvert inflation to an extent, but we'll get to that. As inflation continues to rise, workers' wages are failing to keep pace. Calculations by Business Insider last week found that when factoring in inflation, real wage growth for workers in the U.S. in the information technology, utilities, financial activities, mining and logging, manufacturing, construction, education, and retail trade sectors decreased from January 21 through April 2022. Most industries, including trade, manufacture, and reconstruction, saw a decline between 3 to 4%. As real wages decline for millions of workers, the over 40% increase in wheat prices this year has already led to a substantial increase in global hunger. A report released last week by the UN World Food Program, a hunger catastrophe, estimates that 811 million people around the world, or 1/7 of humanity, face food insecurity or go to bed hungry every night. The same report noted that the number of people suffering from acute food insecurity has more than doubled, from 135 million to 276 million last year, to an estimated 323 million this year. An estimated 48.9 million people are currently on the verge of famine and at risk of starvation. This seismic hunger crisis, the reporter notes, was driven by 4 factors: war, ongoing crop failures due to the effects of climate change, economic consequences from COVID-19, and the overall increased cost of food. The increased cost in food prices led to the UNICEF on Tuesday to release an emergency child alert, warning that without emergency funding, 600,000 children are at immediate risk of severe acute malnutrition. The report revealed that this leading cause of preventable death in children, is also known as severe wasting, has increased by more than 40% since 2016. Following India, some 812,000 children in Indonesia are suffered from severe wasting. So in Indonesia, 800,000 children starving. In India, close to 6 million children starving. Food crisis is not limited to developing countries, expressing the globalized nature of the modern production and the catastrophe impact. A survey conducted in the United Kingdom and released Tuesday by Sky News found that to alleviate inflation burdens, 27% of Britons aged 16 to 75 skipped meals in April. Another 65% sought to reduce costs by not turning on their heating. Gotta love that, right? People gotta bootstrap it. Well, these are hard times. It's just the way it is. You gotta pull yourself up. You gotta give up your hobbies. You gotta wear shit clothes. Go without food. Go without health care. You gotta do what it takes to pull yourself along in the most fucking technically advanced age in the history of humanity. Fucking embarrassing, dude. This is just, the market can't handle it, man. This should be like the testimony that capitalism doesn't work and that we need to come together and build a different economic system. But unfortunately, our world leaders are all a bunch of psychopaths on the payroll of other psychopaths who would rather see the world end than would they want to see a world where they live under socialism, because then they'd have to live like everybody else. They wouldn't be able to hoard and collect interest and exploit the labor power of others. They'd have to actually get a real job like everybody else. In the United States, parents around the country are unable to locate baby formula. And everyone's blaming Biden for that shit, man. Fucking people at work like, oh, there's no baby formula. It's Biden's fault. This inflation is Biden's fault. And I'm like, no, it fucking isn't. It is a global phenomenon.
Oh, that's okay. That's actually a big one. Sorry. Like the baby formula thing, that's a pretty big fucking deal.
Fuck yeah, it is.
Like, think about this, guys. How many babies are not going to be malnourished? I mean, already a lot of like children are malnourished, but even more so. And put on top of that, I think, I saw a recent article. I mean, I need to get it again. It was like 1 in 10 children have long-lasting effects because of COVID. Like they have like issues with like their lungs and stuff like that. Like this is like COVID, and now this bout of inflation, and probably a whole bunch of other shit. I mean, people are saying monkeypox is coming around, and a whole bunch of monkeypox. You can look it up. Or probably there's going to be a whole bunch of other diseases. Like these are mass disabling events, and again, this leads to issues with people's everyday. Like this is going to cost a lot of money, and that's why I don't really have much hope that the government will come in and start subsidizing things or whatever, because they can kick the can down the road, but the question is like who's going to pay for it? And the only people that can pay for it is the rich, and they're not going to pay for it right now during crisis is when they clutch their pearls, and they're not going to let go unless you shoot the hand.
Oh yeah, so it's just going to keep going like this until it just becomes too unbearable that people are going to finally like start to come to. I mean, they're not even going to do it on their own. People have to make the conscious, deliberate decision to come together. All I'm going to say is it's just going to become easier for us over time to radicalize and organize, because more and more people are just going to be disillusioned with it. I mean, radicalization rates, unionization rates are already through the roof. More than ever before, people are more strongly identifying with socialism as you go on. And so in that regard, we should really not waste our time with like trying to like have an honest conversation with conservatives or people who are just ultra right, because these people usually have a survivorship bias. They're just out of touch. They're in a position where they're economically comfortable and it hasn't impacted them yet. And when it does impact them, fascism is the direction they will go. So I would not worry about them. They're a minority. They're a political minority now. They're a shrinking political minority. And what we really need to focus on is having conversations about an alternative economic system, decommodification, building a working class government, a working class state, building unions, building institutions of workers' power, and engaging in class struggle and fighting on the issues and trying to win local elections within local and regional provinces, states, and or regions. So I could go on and on depressing you guys. Like right here, reading that driving up the cost of food prices is the global fuel shortage that is affecting farmers and workers alike. You can't bring food to the stores if you can't drive to the stores. In the United States on Tuesday, for the first time ever, the Auto Club AAA reports that the average price for a gallon of gas in the U.S. is more than $4 in all 50 states, with California leading the nation at $6 per gallon. High prices at the pump most profoundly affect lower-income families. No shit, as they spend a higher proportion of their earnings on gas and are less likely to drive electric vehicles. Mark Finley, a fellow at Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy, told Bloomberg. There are many factors that are contributing to the rise in fuel and food prices, including the ongoing war in Ukraine. When it comes to wheat, Russia and Ukraine account for 30% of all wheat exports. More than 26 countries, including Egypt and Somalia, rely on these two countries for between 50 and 100% of their weight. I was talking about this earlier. How second and third world countries in the Middle East, Northern Africa, rely on Russia and Ukraine for their wheat exports. So currently some 4.5 million tons of wheat are sitting in Black Sea ports, unable to be shipped out due to ongoing hostilities. Data from the Internal Food Policy Research Institute Food Trade Policy Tracker shows that since the outbreak of the war, 23 countries have imposed export restrictions on food, affecting over 17% of the total calories traded on global markets. In addition to restricting staple foods, countries have placed restrictions on potash and nitrogen fertilizer, leading to increased prices. These price increases have in turn forced farmers globally to compensate by planting. Isn't it not wonderful, comrades? Is this not great? Isn't it great how the imperialist powers and like the capitalist powers are more than happy to violate their own rules and principles if it means fucking starving out their political enemies in a war that they fucking straight up enabled and in the first place? Like, I'm just saying, man. Like, every step and every action taken by the West since the end of the Cold War has been an act of aggression. So I'm going to go ahead and post this article for you guys right here. There you go. So, you guys got any commentary?
I mean, nothing else really on that front.
Not really.
I think everyone can.
Yeah, get to the vibes.
Yeah.
Which article do you speak of? I just linked the article on inflation, so there's that. I've also a couple other articles I had ready. Here, I'll just post the ones I was planning on talking about. I had more that I wanted to review, but these are both the Finland to join NATO and the inflation ones I got from WDES, the World Socialist Workers websites. You can check these out in the comment section now, and you guys can grab those. So, I mean, these are pretty much the articles that I linked. Oh, yeah, the inflation one is right here. Soaring AGDA. The inflation one is right here. All right. So, I would like to keep going, but I do have other activities that I need to take care of today. But before we close and before we bring this to an end, is there anything you guys would like to talk about?
Wait, was that the only topics? Oh, I thought there was
I mean,
else.
I had others I wanted to review, but I was planning on killing the stream around the 2-hour mark because I've got other occupations to take care of today anyways.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's not really anything else.
All right.
But yeah, do you want to say anything, Lucy? Lucy Graham?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me. If you want to interject or say anything, I won't bite. If you want to talk. I'm not going to stop you.
I know it's just hell. It's like, what the hell do I say when they're talking about everything I can just already vibe with?
I would say this. So I guess like to kind of go against some tendencies, a very prominent tendency within like the left, or really just honestly everyone's like into this doomer or doomerisms. So yeah, I'm not gonna be a Steven Pinker and say like the world's great, the world's shining, everything's beautiful. I'm not one to believe that. I'm actually quite a pessimist, but I would say this. Understand that at the end of the day, and like keep in mind that I guess like, from us as Marxists or primarily Marxist, the contradictions are there. And this is only intensifying them. And though it's going to be brutal, there is going to be change. And from that change, you'll see a better world. So that doesn't mean you should just do nothing. I mean, if anything, it should empower you more to do something, because then you'll be one of the people that will make that world occur, right? So I think that's the main thing that should be on your minds. Read up, organize, try to make change to your community. People are stubborn, but over time and as shit gets rough, they're going to come back to you. They're going to come back to a cause. They're going to make something of it because, I mean, they're human. They, regardless of what mode of production we're in, regardless of what ideology, people want to survive. People want to make something better. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the dialectic is in motion, and things are going to get worse before they get better. I'm not too scared that the world's going to end. I think that, I hope the logic for this, for what we're talking about, decommodification and just worker ownership, I hope the logic and rationale for this new economic mode can become obvious enough to a large enough sect of the population that people can become, inspired to the point and enthusiastic to the point to where they want to like have an active role to play in it. And it's been done in the past. Like constructing socialism only works if people make the conscious, deliberate decision to do it. So what we need to do is get people inspired. We need to get people involved, agitated, radicalized. Because look at the Sanders campaign as a base template for what we need to do. I'm not saying, we could run for president, but the point is that why Sanders' campaign was such a success was because of the degrees of young people he brought into it. Because he got people enthusiastic, not just to turn out and vote and show up at the campaign rallies, but to organize on his campaign's behalf. That's what we need. We need people that are so enthusiastic and inspired that they will show up. They will go to the protests. They will participate in organizing activities. They will ask the questions that need to be asked, and they will try to bring more and more people into it. Because that's what the establishment fears most, is actual democracy. The workers coming together and building institutions of dual power and going on to take their power back. Our system is designed to demoralize, discourage, beat down, gaslight, and terrorize people into going along with it. They thrive on your demoralization. They depend on you being apathetic, on not caring, on feeling like there is no hope. Their whole game plan rests on you being like that. It's contingent on that, on people just not giving a shit or just being apathetic or just not caring because, oh, I as an individual can't change anything, but it's not about you. It's about all of us, and it's about all of us coming together. But it really just comes down to that. So we need to build the groundwork, because if you build it, they will come. That's my message. If you build it, they will come. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was just gonna say. Okay, Sorry, I was just like looking in the. I don't know if you're looking at the comments. Well, who the hell is this Matthew Valente guy talking about evil Christians? What is this?
He don't like Christians. Wait for the subject of evil Christians. Please be brought up. Believe me, it's really.
What are you talking? Can you give
what
like?
What the fuck are you talking about, bro?
I'm sorry, that just really that threw me off. What? Like, what are you talking about? Can you please like describe what you're talking about?
I don't know, but someone else is saying Karl Marx didn't predict any of this shit. I mean, he made predictions. Some of them came true, others did not. He predicted socialist revolutions would occur. What he did not predict is that these socialist revolutions would occur in the periphery third world backwaters and the colonized world surrounding the imperial core. I mean, shit, even Engels wrote about the aristocracy of labor and first world bribery, how first world was bribed with the plunders of imperialism. And in the end, like something I'm not trying to say, I'm a third worldist or anything, but there is a very valid point in that workers in the first world, due to, just being bought off with higher living standards, as well as the degree of indoctrination and mind control that's going on, there is a case to be made, a good case to be made, that you're a lot more likely to get revolution in the second and third world, and that's the United States is probably one of the last places that's going to go socialist in the end. I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it really also just doesn't really matter if like Karl Marx wasn't, tapped into like the world consciousness or something to see what's going to occur, right? Many of his predictions were also very vague. I mean, you don't see him having whole swaths of writing on like how exactly socialism was going to arise and how it will be. He saw tendencies within the system. He saw what was, he saw like the contradictions, and he saw generally where it could go. We're not like dealing with, specific predictions. And yeah, of course he didn't, because they didn't even have like at that time they didn't even have the wealth of not just of knowledge but of systems to find knowledge at the time. Like ecological studies, I don't even think they existed at his time. So of course he wouldn't have predicted this. Nobody would have, and I don't think Marxism or any other like system of knowledge should be about one person or its very beginning predicting everything and us holding to that prediction. It's rather about a system of concepts that we can apply to our particular situation, to the situation of the world and any time and place, and any time, not place, because it's the whole world. And to to make maybe like some like quick predictions, but mostly about what we can do. What is to be done. Okay, so yeah, I think I'm sorry. I would love to like go on to the whole Christian like or something like that, but this person seems to be very obsessive, and I don't. And this has no. Yeah, this has nothing to it.
Yeah, just ignore him. So I had a change of heart. I got a little bit of time left, and there is one last thing I wanted to review. While we do have a bit of time left, so I'm going to share screen, and we are going to. So I found this in my recommended, right here. It's was posted a few days ago, and what this is Solid Snake telling us why KGB are evil. And I found this after in my recommendation feed. It was posted 2 days ago, had 500,000 views, and I'm like, oh, shit's going viral. So I watched this, and simple history. They're in animation channel. They make these history videos that are, as we know, very well cited. Oh, never mind. They do have some works cited. Okay, good. So I'm going into this blind, but basically, you guys ready to listen to Solid Snake tell us why the KGB are evil?
I was born ready for this.
All right. One last thing. Can't finish a stream without reacting to something.
The KGB, who they were, what they did. The KGB was the chief government intelligence and security agency of the Soviet Union from 1954 until its collapse in 1991. The Soviet Union was made up of 15 republics: Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarusia, Estonia, Georgia, Kyrgyzia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldavia, Tajikistan, Turkmenia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. In some republics, the KGB didn't operate directly, but there were similar organizations that carried out the same tasks. The KGB consisted of two parts: intelligence services and military units that were totally separate from the Soviet armed forces. They operated as a completely independent government agency. But although the KGB marketed itself as the intelligence agency of the USSR, it was also a form of secret police, ensuring citizens all across the republic stayed in line with Soviet ideals, and political dissidence was dealt with quietly and often fatally. KGB stands for Комитет государственной безопасности, which translates to Committee for State Security in English.
So this is just pretty blatantly propaganda, and the reason why I say that is because it's got like this insidious type music playing in the background, like dun dun dun, and the other side of it is just painting them like the secret police. My issue with this is just like, what fucking country doesn't have secret police? And why are the KGB uniquely evil? Again, I'm going in this blind, so let's see what he's got to say.
Most famous former KGB agent alive today is Russian President Vladimir Putin. In March 1954, the KGB replaced the existing MVD that had been in place the previous year, and had such well-informed and successful agents of espionage that Joseph Stalin knew far less about his own agents than those working for the UK and the US. Over the course of the war and beyond, Soviet intelligence agencies had thousands of international spies operating in dozens of countries, and at one point was the largest institution of its kind. But at home, they were uncomfortably compared to Germany's World War II secret police, the Gestapo. Political dissidents, those who spoke out about anti-communist ideals or against the government, frequently found their homes invaded and themselves arrested, at best.
Good.
As the world headed into it.
Good. I don't have a problem with this. Oh, boo-hoo. Oh, boo-hoo. You won't let me undermine the cause of the workers so that we can build a force of reaction against the world's socialist government, you know. I have no problems with this whatsoever. Capitalist countries with their secret police do the exact same shit. Like, are we going to pretend that COINTELPRO or you know, the disruption of the Black Panthers or the Cold War didn't happen? There was a time in this country, like during the 50s especially, during the Red Scare, where you could lose your job, be arrested or deported, or even be shot for being a socialist or communist. Like, so you could have your life completely ruined and destroyed if you were a known out-and-out communist. So this sort of witch hunting that they're trying to paint the KGB as doing is quite literally way more active within the capitalist world in the United States. So we'll see what he's got.
Cold War, this only intensified with the KGB, monitoring both private and public opinions of Soviet citizens at home. After the war, waves of anti-communist sentiment spread throughout the West, heightening the tensions of the hardening Cold War between the Soviets, Europeans, and Americans.
Anti-communist sentiments were actively enabled and financed and funded by Western intelligence agencies. You guys ever heard of Operation Mockingbird? Check this shit out. Operation Mockingbird, Project Mockingbird. So I'm gonna bring you over here. Check this out. And I'll just share the whole screen, fuck it. But yeah, Project Mockingbird. CIA integrated itself in news agencies galore. They basically were tasked with spreading anti-communist propaganda anywhere and everywhere. You also have agencies like Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, who were pumping anti-communist propaganda into Eastern Europe at the time of the Cold War. So you've got that. You've got other operations they were planning, like Operation Garden Plot, when they were plotting on unleashing the army on dozens of United States cities if we didn't see a reduction of civil rights activism and the protesting and the activist work during the 60s and 70s continue to escalate. You've got the head of the DEA admitting on his deathbed that the only reason, the main motivation for the war on drugs was so that the government would have an excuse to arrest civil rights activists and protesters. Like, that's straight up the reason why we got the war on drugs. So what exactly is he saying? What point is he making here? That they're uniquely evil? Because, like, literally every state does this shit. And mind you, America has a much greater capacity to monitor and surveil and spy on its own domestic population due to the information age. I mean, what's going on every single day? You have companies monitoring our browsing habits, or Google and these other tech giants monitoring our browsing habits and building portfolios on us so that they can sell this information to advertisers. I mean, you've got the NSA who's watching everyone at all times. So, like, thing is by the 1970s, the Soviet Union did not have, like, particularly sophisticated information technology or the capacity to surveil their population on the same degree that the United States could do then and currently is doing right now. So the point I'm trying to hammer away home is that, yeah, KGB cracked down on anti-communists. And one, it was based. Two, the whole point of a secret police and a deep state and the state in general is it is a tool of class oppression. In the same way that the CIA is a tool of class oppression and the FBI is a tool of class oppression, tasked with directly undermining and sabotaging left-wing organizing and dissidents and union organizing and revolutionary groups, the KGB was tasked with undermining and sabotaging anti-communist groups.
This was called the Second Red Scare. The first had occurred decades earlier, between 1917 and 1920, and before the creation of the KGB. During this period, the Americans became aware of the volume of Soviet spies across the US, living both legally and illegally. They feared what these spies would do to their society and political ideals. This was a particular fear of Senator Joseph McCarthy, who spearheaded investigations that led to hundreds of accusations of treason and subversion. It's impossible to know the true number of victims of McCarthy's fanatical approach to rooting out Russian spies, but estimates place the number of those imprisoned in the hundreds, and it's predicted over 10,000 lost their jobs as a result of being questioned.
Thank you. Thank you.
Subsequently, over the course of the early 1950s, the number of Soviet spies across America dropped dramatically, with the last major illegal spy, Rudolf Abel, being betrayed by his assistant in 1957. Nevertheless, at home, the KGB continued to tighten the reins on Soviet society. In the 1960s, due to a U.S. political dissident, John Anthony Walker, Soviet intelligence was able to decipher thousands of U.S. Navy messages, giving them a decisive military edge should they choose to act upon it. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 began with a protest by university students against the USSR, as well as their hardline Stalinist former head of state, Matyas Rákosi. Prague Spring began in 1969, when Czechoslovakia tried to assert its independence from the USSR by reclaiming political power back into its member state.
Okay, so these are some very lengthy topics, which for brevity's sake, I'm not going to really get into. But he's going to make the point that Czechoslovakia and Hungary, Soviets and other Warsaw allies went to these countries and they rolled in with tanks to basically thwart the protest and oust the opposition. Because last thing, the communist camp, which is nowhere near as wealthy or as powerful or as influential as the capitalist world, that is just a fresh socialist camp that hasn't entrenched itself to the same degree. They can't really afford to manufacture the illusion of freedom like the United States and the West can. They don't have the resources and the wealth to buy off the social peace, at least historically. So what you saw back then is they were more likely, like capitalist countries, that's the thing. Capitalist countries are a lot more likely to subvert and manipulate you and try to control you to get you to behave and fall in line with ideals that they want you to fall in line with and support policies that they want you to support and let you think that you came to this of your own free choice and volition when you really did not. On the other hand, socialist countries, if you were just an out open anti-communist and so on, then and you were trying to organize and orchestrate these actions, what was a lot more likely to happen is your little newspaper and your org would just get broken up and they would just arrest you. So when people want to say, oh, but that's authoritarian, that's bad. Okay. So, I mean, would it have been a more preferable alternative if they just did what the West does and constantly manipulate and control their public through misinformation in the media? Honestly, all in all, like the socialist governments on average were a lot more honest and a lot less likely to manipulate you as a citizen within those countries. So, yeah, that's the main point I'm trying to hammer away at. But every state does this. France fucking threatens to leave, or they did leave NATO. They did leave NATO, and all of the NATO countries made a huge fuss about it. And there was even talk about like fucking invading France and forcing them to stay into NATO. I mean, it didn't happen, but that
Wait, what?
on the table.
I didn't know that.
What's up?
I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Wait, when was this?
France left the NATO in the 70s, I believe. So yeah, France left NATO. But my point is that if France was moved, let's say there was a socialist military camp in Latin America, and France was instead on the most southern border of the United States. France is just right there; it's on top of Mexico, and France decides to leave this military alliance with America. Due to its proximity, I don't think America or the rest of the NATO countries would be anywhere near as comfortable with that. And they weren't comfortable with it. Like they took issue with it. And, you know, the fact that France left actually threatened the stability of the entire alliance. So it was obviously not just a cut and clear thing like people think.
On both occasions, the Red Army of the USSR was quick to act, invading the countries and shooting thousands of protesters and civilians to quell the uprising. As usual, the KGB quickly and quietly worked alongside the Red Army and USSR's other operatives to destabilize the revolutions. In Czechoslovakia, they infiltrated pro-democratic institutions to undermine political sentiments and reported back to the Soviet government. On October 29, 1956, in Hungary, a report by Chief of the KGB, Ivan Serov, claimed inaccurately that all...
Okay, so in regards to Czechoslovakia, they were getting cozy with NATO, and their leadership was basically flirting with the idea of just leaving and defecting to the West, which was a real thing. There were sentiments within Czechoslovakia at the time for that. Czechoslovakia's economy was stagnating. They were dealing with a lot of undemocratic leadership. People had many grievances with what was going on in Czechoslovakia. And really, the biggest issue was the anti-Soviet protests and the threat of breaking away and leaving the Warsaw Pact alliance. And if you have Hungary and Czechoslovakia leaving this alliance, then that would have threatened the stability of the entire thing. So yeah, of course they didn't let it happen. They quelled the protests. So again, that just goes back to my central point, which is that every state exercises class oppression and quote unquote authoritarianism to varying degrees. And the only reason you think the communist world is uniquely terrible about it is because you've been spooked into believing so.
The groups were seeking up.
Like, just saying. In fact, let me go ahead and show you guys a little something, a little infograph folder. Oh, here we go. Nothing screams authoritarianism like the CIA backing death squads, murdering thousands of people in labor organizers across Latin America. I should make a video like that where I'm talking like Solid Snake, and then
And then these countries decided to organize for better wages. So that's when
Oh my
they
God.
sent in the far-right death squads. Like, dude, that's what I had to fucking do. I had to fucking make a video in the exact same style of this, you know, and just point and do the exact same thing. I could
Yeah, I'm not
literally do
gonna.
the exact same thing with America.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like. I guess like kind of rather than just focus on it being simply. So I guess sorry. Rather than focusing on these countries, like all of us kind of doing the same thing, like all of us having secret police and what have you. Um, I think it's more that the USSR was obviously not trying to become like South America. Like you showed that picture with like South America.
Yeah.
That's what they were, they feared. And I guess that can be up for debate. I don't know enough of the history to exactly say, but I mean, we do have, and we don't exactly have we obviously don't see right now a case where um, the United States was like destabilized and turned communist, but we did see the case where the USSR was dissolved and became capitalist. And the question is like, did that end up being good? Were their
No.
fears correct? I mean,
They're
it's at least to me like what it seems like what they became and how they became that. It seems like those fears were correct. Now, was it now? I guess the question is like, could they often be overblown? Could they be too strict? Yes, but how do you know what is strict enough? And there's plenty of interest being played into it. There's plenty of corruption that's being played into it, and I don't think we
Yeah.
should downplay that. But at the end of the day, like it's a hostile situation that they're within. That's why we talk about the whole siege communism and like capitalist encirclement because it's a
Yeah.
real problem they have to deal with.
Yeah, they were encircled, exactly. At the very start of the revolution, they got invaded by like 14 countries. America and like Western Europe did everything in its power to destroy and undermine socialism since the start. And I mean, this sitting here, it's just this liberal moralizing, like this whining, like not understanding that why these developments occur in the first place. The reason why people bring up these factoids and bring up these things about the KGB has fuck all to do with a genuine concern for authority and liberty versus dictatorship and democracy, and everything to do with a propaganda point, which they're using to try and emotionally manipulate people into just being anti-communists more than anything else, just staying complicit in their own oppression. So otherwise, socialist intelligence, I mean, I understand it as the reputation it does for being repressive, but the thing is like, it only appears that way because they aren't constantly psyoping you. They aren't constantly like trying to manipulate you. That's really the real difference. It comes down to, imperialist bribery and psyops, just mass psychological manipulation, the fact that all our media is privately owned. The reason why they don't rely on the brute force approach to the same extent, or it seems that way, is for the simple reason that they haven't needed to, at least domestically. And even then, they rely on the brute force approach all the time. They were fucking last year black bagging protesters and organizers up in where's it called? Portland. Yeah, up in Portland during the BLM protests the other year. So yeah, and I'm glad you brought.
Too.
Yeah, you brought up the point about encirclement. That's true. They got encircled. We're talking about.
I think, sorry, I was just gonna say like, I think we need to also understand with people like, I mean, there's different kinds of people like who say this kind of stuff and spread this kind of propaganda, but we have to be fair that many are also just ignorant, or perhaps like they may know like the specific information, but notice the way they put it. Like in this video, notice they bring up McCarthy, and notice like for us it's McCarthyism. We focus on this one politician or just a group of bad like egg politicians who end up like leading this sort of anti-communist charge that fucks over a bunch of people. But we never think of it as something that's fundamental to the United States, that is a part of the CIA. like even things like MK Ultra, we always put it down to a few bad eggs within an organization. While here, and we tend to treat the KGB as a complete like, oh no, that's just this terrible thing.
Is. Yeah,
that's just what socialism is. It's just you know.
It's
whatever.
Hypocrisy. It's the good old liberal double standard where socialism.
But it's something that they have. But it's something that they believe in. It's something that possesses like their way of thinking of history.
Yeah,
and that's what we have to keep in mind.
People don't connect to. Well, yeah, that's exactly how they demonstrated it or showcased it. It's like it's a couple bad eggs. It's not something endemic. That's the great thing about capitalism, dude. There's always someone else to blame for the people that are actually responsible. Capitalism is great at muddying the waters and making it on the surface more difficult to point the finger as to who or what is to be held accountable for various social ills. Like, yeah, it's just a couple bad eggs. They'll make excuses for that and say, but the systems is fine. But no, it's part of the system. But then like everything bad that happens under socialism, oh, it's just because of socialism. You know, it's fucking ridiculous, because if you hold capitalism to the same standards as you hold socialism, capitalism is an objectively shittier system, and that all of the boons and benefits that people enjoy under capitalism are privileges of the first world, and that these privileges have less to do with capitalism and more to do with just there being more wealth hoarded and consolidated and concentrated in this one spot. So, yeah.
Now communists and killing them, as well as any state security officials they found. The Hungarian military leader Paul Melita responded by negotiating a diplomatic meeting between a Hungarian delegation and the USSR. During the midnight of that same evening, Serov ordered the arrest of the Hungarian delegation. The following day, after the removal of their leader by the KGB, the Soviet army attacked Hungary again. The uprising was quelled just 7 days later, officially ending on November 11th, 1956. After the uprising was over, Serov and the KGB continued to monitor Hungary closely, once again employing tactics to monitor any internal dissidents. By 1964, the head of the USSR, Nikita Khrushchev, had fallen out of political favor. He had denounced Stalin years earlier, a shocking move to the USSR, and had moved
a stupid one at that,
to eradicate Stalin's policies. This, coupled with his later handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, led to other government officials and the KGB chief, Vladimir Simichesny, to plot his removal. Unlike most former heads of the USSR, Khrushchev did not meet an unfortunate end. On October 13th, when he landed at Vnukovo Airport, he was met by Simichesny and other heads of the coup, who took him to the Kremlin, with little resistance from Khrushchev himself. 24 hours later, the premier announced his allegedly voluntary removal from power. He spent the rest of his life in a house already successfully smuggled
Get to the point, Solid Snake.
Copies to a Western publisher, much to the KGB's dismay. In the 1970s, the KGB became more heavily involved in South Asia. They influenced political opinion across newly formed Bangladesh, starting in 1973 with the installment of the first president, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Initially democratic, just 2 years later, Mujibur formed a one-party state.
That doesn't make it undemocratic. Fuck you.
His influence grew exponentially across the rest of the 70s, despite Mujibur's own reign coming to an abrupt end 6 months later, when he and most of his family were assassinated during a coup.
Yeah, by the actual dictators, by the actual undemocratic, pro-capitalist, reactionary components. Like, he really shouldn't have brought up Bangladesh, because the history behind that is all types of fucked up and actually proves my biggest point in my favor against him. So... like, I'm not really too brushed up on the history of Bangladesh, but yeah, no, there were counter-revolutionary components within it, and like the United States basically backed and enabled the overthrow of a democratically elected leader, which is why Soviets offered aid to the Bangladeshis against him.
This didn't slow down KGB influence in Bangladesh, however. By the end of the decade, the number of officials in the area had more than doubled, and they had printed numerous defamatory news articles targeting the newly appointed and West-friendly de facto president, Ziaur Rahman.
Nope, not a president.
The KGB were heavily involved in Afghanistan in the late 1970s. They had heavily influenced political leadership in the country and sought to control it by placing a puppet president in the leadership role.
Okay, I'm done. I'm finished. Now I'm finished. So... people, I'm just gonna, in summary, people need to learn how politics works. The problem here is that people don't know how politics works. They don't know how class struggle works, and they don't understand like the context and the conditions for which these things are happening. The capitalists are constantly trying to impose top-down imperialism all over the world, where they restructure these countries and their economies, hinder their development, and set up these comprador capitalists and these dictatorships where only like a tiny percent of the population profits while everyone else is just basically being super exploited and hyper enslaved to enrich first world imperialists and the first world. So capitalists are constantly trying to push capitalism. They're constantly trying to dominate new markets and trying to like gain economic control and puppeteering over entire countries. So if the capitalists are constantly trying to spread capitalism, and class struggle is a global international thing, does it not make sense for the socialists to try and spread socialism as much as possible, even if in some instances that socialist leadership wasn't installed democratically, trademark? Especially when you consider liberal democracy is easily riggable and easily controllable and manufactured. The reason why they want to push liberal democracy so much is so they can buy and rig the elections. That's really all it comes down to, manipulating public perception, which is why Soviet democracy is superior, you know?
Also, to answer Too Comfy's question, is BLM Marxist or is that just a rumor? Thank you for asking a question that is I feel like that's like not mocking or something. It's a decentralized group, so I mean there's not really like any particular ideology it holds to. I mean, I guess just it's against anti-blackness and, you know, police brutality. So you could be a liberal, and you could be a Marxist, you could be an anarchist and advocate for that.
Yeah, so BLM is fundamentally a liberal reformist current, but that still does not necessarily make it a bad thing. Doesn't make it a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. We should still participate in it, even though like liberals are going to try to co-opt it. I mean, that's just something we're going to have to be aware of. Is just liberals constantly trying to co-opt our energy. And co-opt our rhetoric and message. It's just something.
Or just simply, yeah, or just simply a lot of new people who join and, you know, want to like voice their concerns and want to help the cause. You know, they're going to be liberal because, you know, they're new to it.
Of course.
And later on, they may become an anarchist or a Marxist or I don't know.
Yeah, that later on. They'll start as liberal, and then they can become an anarcho-liberal, and then they can become a social democrat, and then they can become a social fascist. Nah, that's not always the way the trend goes, but generally, for a lot of anarchists, in my experience, it's sort of like baby's first leftism. It's like they're on their way out, but they're not quite out of the jungle yet. They're in, you know, a more clear patch of woods, a more clear area, but they're still like plagued with individualism, in my experience. That doesn't make them bad people to work with. At the very least, like the vast majority, pretty much every principled anarchist is against voting blue. Then again, they're against voting, period. But that's still better than voting blue. I'll take that over Democratic partisan hacks masquerading as leftists, as they often do.
Yeah, but did you want to add anything, Lucy Grimm, or do you think we're
Well,
I don't know if Grimm are there. I don't think Grimm's there.
Yeah, probably not. But hey, guys, I'm going to go ahead and kill the stream. The reason why I turned the camera off is because I got rid of the backdrop. I've actually got to head out here in a second. I just wanted to react to at least one video, and just get that done and out of the way. We'll definitely be streaming again next week. I'll have some fresh content for you guys coming in this week as well. Just all in all, stay tuned, and thanks for listening. And thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate it. It's always good to have extra input.
Of course. Glad to be on.
Oh, I'm glad you came. So, everyone else, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll probably go live again next week at some point.